Some things in life are certain. Death will find all of us. Taxes are an unescapable reality, and Hollywood will reboot existing properties over and over and over for the rest of time, or for as long as they keep making money. But how do you reboot a reboot of a reboot and keep it fresh? Especially with a character as beloved as Batman, or The Batman in this case. Well, with the trailer dropping for 2021's The Batman, we're going to be taking a look at the prominent live-action Batman actors and weigh up where our Pat ranks among them. We're doing this based on portrayal of Bruce Wayne, overall performance as the Bat, and our view on the world they inhabit. We're not including Gotham in this because they only had a few seconds of Batman. But before we whip out our grappling hooks and swing into action, we'd be grateful if you could give this a like. If you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about all our latest videos. We produce weekly content about film and TV, so if that's your thing, go ahead and click the subscribe button. Go ahead, I'll wait. I'm Stephen from Unmissable Movies, and here's our trailer reaction for The Batman and our take on where Robert Pattinson will rank amongst the other Batmen. Let's go for it. So, pushing past the obvious worst actors, we start with George Clooney at number 7. This version of The Dark Knight was just awful from every angle. Almost every angle. As Bruce, he just doesn't seem to have anything about him, and there's nothing really to separate this performance from his roles in Ocean's 11 or ER. There's no major guilt or trauma, it just feels generic. Heck, he doesn't even do a voice. In costume, he looks incredibly out of place and even self-aware, like when someone you know turns up to a party outing a new bold fashion choice for the first time. As for the world he inhabits, it's unforgivable. Why does he have a bat card? Why is everything so neon? And why does an English schoolgirl take a transatlantic flight and stay in her school uniform? It's all just baffling, and you can see why it derailed the franchise. At number 6, we have Adam West. Now, all I can say is, it's of its time. As Bruce Wayne, he's fine, but you don't get much of the sense of torment, anger and nuance that many of the latter iterations have had. The world is 60s camp at its finest. So how does West do in The Cape? Well, still, it's not Clooney bad, but it certainly doesn't stand the test of time. Next on our list at 5 is Val Kilmer. His Bruce Wayne is actually okay, in a 90s shampoo advert kind of way. Whilst you don't get the hyper-realism of the more recent versions, we do see moments of inner turmoil and some complexity. His Batman, however, is probably only ever going to be remembered for the bat nipples and for the "chicks dig the car" line. Had Kilmer come into the Tim Burton universe, I think he would have been strong. But the over-the-top villain performances and the stylistic tone just reduce his performance to an okay overall effort. Now this is a tough one because it is a prediction, but we're going to place Robert Pattinson at number 4. I think there's loads of potential, and he could end up being higher, but I think there's also a chance that it could be a really bad casting call. So, let's first get into what's good. Seeing this trailer at least reassured us that we're going to get a different take on the Caped Crusader. Because Christian Bale went for a super buff, ripped Batman, it seems Affleck just went one further and just beefed up another notch or two. He's like a freaking bear, so there's not much a new Batman could have done to outdo this. Perhaps a leaner, stealthier looking Batman, at the very least, is intriguing. Pattinson even said in an interview that he refused to work out for this role. And I guess if they're going for realism, why would Bruce be so muscly? He's not got superpowers, he doesn't take a solid year off fighting crime to get in shape, so this feels more true to life. Plus, this is Batman Year 2, so maybe he's just not got his bat muscles yet, due to being so young. His bat suit looks pretty darn good, and I love how the bat symbol seems to be a weapon or maybe two halves of a gun. Maybe even the gun used to kill his parents. I also love how they show the eye makeup. Every modern Batman has eye makeup, but when they remove the mask, it's gone. Again, this feels like realism even beyond Nolan's universe. Interestingly, Pattinson actually auditioned for the role while working for the Dark Knight trilogy director Christopher Nolan on Tenet. He had to lie and say he had a family emergency. Reportedly, Nolan replied, "You're auditioning for Batman, aren't you? You don't mess with Nolan. Nolan messes with us." Director Matt Reeves, in contrast to Nolan, and indeed most directors, is going to focus more on Batman as the world's greatest detective, a characteristic prevalent in the comics but often lacking in the movies. We see shades of it, but they're usually more action-driven than they are noir detective films. In terms of the sort of world he'll be in, it looks awesome. The trailer opens with gaffer tape being pulled and cuts to a man covered in said tape with "No More Lies" written on it. This is Paul Dano playing the Riddler, and it's a far cry from his last screen outing. Thank goodness. This intro immediately evokes the stylistic tone and darkness of David Fincher's Seven, a film where the antagonist finds out people's secret sins and dishes out punishments based on them. We also hear Nirvana's Something in the Way creeping in, a dark, grungy song for a dark, gritty film. We're also introduced to a slew of Batman villains. We've just seen the Riddler, we have an unrecognisable Colin Farrell as Penguin, Zoe Kravitz as Selina Kyle or Catwoman, and we see from the cast list that we also have Carmine Falcone. Hopefully they'll be careful in how they do this. We don't want another Spider-Man 3 villain overload. We also have Jeffrey Wright as Jim Gordon, and there's rumoured to be a spin-off series in the works following him. All in, this feels promising, and when Robert Pattinson, or Robert Pattinson if you will, beats the living daylights out of that goon and responds to "Who are you?" with "I'm vengeance" in a pretty great Batman voice, you just feel like it's going to be totally different, which is exciting. Now for the negatives. It's Robert Pattinson. You know, the guy from the Twilight films and Harry Potter? Now, I remember Heath Ledger's casting raised some eyebrows, and look how that turned out. So it's good to keep an open mind, but equally, he just looks more of a villain than a hero. The slender frame, floppy hair and pale complexion, all just seems more naturally, well, villainy. If you looked at the cast list without knowing who they were playing, you'd probably assume Pattinson was the Riddler, Dano Penguin and Farrell as Batman. And maybe that's the point. It's not expected. But for me, it'll go one of two ways. A stroke of genius or a misfire. At number 3, we have Michael Keaton. Keaton's Batman for me is incredible, and for many, his interpretation is the yardstick in which to measure others on. Whilst you could argue he's too short for the role, it never really seems to matter. His voice, brilliant. The Batsuit, brilliant. The car, brilliant. And what is incredible is this was the first screen version since the 60s, so all he had to draw on was the comics and the director's vision. As Bruce, he's a believable, tortured billionaire, and while the gothic feel of the films might not be to everyone's taste, they are pretty fitting to the character. Keaton was no doubt the best of the original Batman anthology. Now this is where the rubber hits the road, so I'm just going to say it. At number 2, we have Christian Bale. Now, before you have a go at me, hear me out. I love these Batman films, and I think Bale is utterly brilliant. Like Keaton before him, he took on the role after a somewhat lame predecessor. His voice was something totally new. He was the first to really beef up for the role, and he gave us a grounded character that was compelled to stand up and fight crime and injustice. But I think there are flaws. While I think his Bruce Wayne is pretty well perfect, I do struggle with aspects of Bale's Batman. The voice has become a source of parody. The suit, at least in the latter films, with the movable neck, just makes him look less fearsome. And it always seems like Bale's face just never looks 100% convincing in the mask. Almost like it's a size too small. Some of the negatives aren't Bale's fault though. In Batman Begins, the film was focused on Batman. In Dark Knight, the Joker and even the theme of chaos and corruption seem to take centre stage. And in the final film, we have a massive gap between Batman's loss to Bane and him rising, making it feel like the Bat's hardly in it. And he fights in the light, which just looks rubbish. So Bale is amazing, but not the best. Which means at number 1 we have Ben Affleck. And I'm as surprised as you. But here's why we've chosen him. So, beginning with Affleck's portrayal of the burdened billionaire. He's playing Bruce at a time in his life where he's wearied and disenfranchised, but he pulls it off with subtlety and style. In all of Affleck's films, he looks like he's carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, without a way out. And he also just looks the part in every way. At 6'4", he's the tallest actor to play him, and his appearance is so much like many of the comic and TV illustrations. As Batman, he's just huge, and you believe he's capable of taking on a room of henchmen without breaking a sweat. He looks fantastic in the suit, and his jawline lends itself perfectly to the cowl. His voice is also great, and it's done using tech, which certainly makes more sense than Bale's growl. Now, he's in some of the worst films containing Batman, and he never had a solo film, and that's a shame, but I think you could place Affleck into any other Batman universe and he'd make it better. And that's why he's topping our ranking. But who knows, when the final 75% of The Batman is filmed, we might have to revise this list. Thanks so much for watching. Do you agree with our assessment of Robert Pattinson? Who would you have cast? We'd love to know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you haven't subscribed, please do so to be informed about all our latest videos. And you can share this with your friends on Facebook and Twitter and TikTok. Thanks again, and we'll see you soon.